I was born and brought up on a farm in County Durham, near Bishop Auckland in County Durham. I was born in 1928, and I had a younger brother who was about 3 years younger than I was. The farm was a mixed farm. We had cows, sheep, and grew a lot of crops, and the work was done with Clydesdale horses in the days before the war. We eventually got a tractor when the war started. My mother, who had been a school teacher, had to learn how to be a farmer's wife, and my grandmother always said she'd never make a farmer's wife, but she made a very good farmer's wife. My father bred chinchilla rabbits to show, and all the ones that weren't good enough to show we ate, which was very useful during the war for extra meat, especially when they had to feed the workers who came to work on the farm. I went to the village school till I was 11 and passed the scholarship to go to the grammar school in Spennymoor. And I went there till I was 18, I think. And then I went to train as a physiotherapist. First of all, I was going to train to work on a farm, but I changed my mind and went to train as a physio in Manchester. And from there, I went to Pinderfields Hospital in Wakefield, where that was fun. I was there for quite a while. There I lived in the nurses' home, and then I decided it was time I went home, so I went back to the farm and worked at Dryburn Hospital in Durham. And then my brother started talking about going to New Zealand. We had an uncle and aunt who lived in New Zealand and four cousins. And my grandmother was always talking about these people. And Charlie decided he was going to go to New Zealand. And by then, clothing ration had come off the ration, and I'd spent all my money on clothes. So I decided to get a job here, and I applied for a job at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Rotorua. I was accepted. It's a bit strange now, but I was accepted. And I came here in 1953. I came on the SS Rangitoto. It took 4 weeks. It was like a luxury cruise. It was wonderful. There was so much food and a whole lot of people and a lot of fun. There were meant to be 4 immigrant girls in the cabin, but one of them had decided not to come, so we had an ordinary passenger in with us. One of the girls was coming to work at the Public Trust in Auckland, and another one was going as a radiographer to Napier. And we had a good time there till we came to we were supposed to stop at Pitcairn Island, and we didn't because it was night time, and one poor person on the ship who was supposed to get off the ship at Pitcairn had to come to New Zealand and would have to get on another ship to go back, and hopefully they'd stop at Pitcairn. They didn't berth there, they just moored off, and the people came out in boats. But because we were there in the middle of the night, they didn't bother to stop. And when we got to Wellington, it was night time, so we weren't allowed to come off the ship. But the customs officers came on, and the people from the health department. And I'd thought I'd written to New Zealand House in London and asked what I was supposed to do when I got there, and they said, oh well, make your way to Rotorua. So I thought, oh well, I'll have a day or two in Wellington first. But the people came on the boat from the health department and said, oh no, you don't. You belong to us now. We've got 2 tickets for you for tomorrow. If you get off the boat early enough, you'll go on a bus, and if you don't, you'll go later on the train. And somebody will come and collect you. So when I went off the boat the next morning, somebody collected me and took me. She was very nice. Oh no, first they took me to the health department, and I met some of the big bods there. And then she took me to the railway station, advised me to hire 2 pillows, shilling each. She also advised me, I was wearing a skirt, and she said if I had slacks to change into slacks on the train. And that journey was an amazing thing. We set off, and it was daylight, and every time the train stopped at the station, people got off and bought cups of tea and pies. I didn't get off in case I didn't get back on again. And then we got to, I think it was Martin, I'm sure it was Martin, and everybody got off and went into a big building where there were tables and forms, and we all sat down and had an evening meal. Then we got back on the train, and after that we went on, and it was getting dark, and well, I hadn't a clue how far it was to Rotorua. Before I arrived at Rotorua, I had to get on a bus from Hamilton, and we went over the Mamacoos, and it was so mysterious with mist and everything. I really wondered where I'd got to. And the smell going past the Curragh Park into Rotorua was very off-putting. And we arrived there, and my cousin and her husband and 2 girls were there, and my boss. And my boss said hello, and then she looked at the watch. She said, right, we start at 8 o'clock. So I said, I haven't been to sleep and I haven't had anything to eat. So she let me off to 1, and then I went there.
Tell me how you met Teo.
Right, well, I lived in the public hospital nurses' home for quite a while, and I met 2 friends, Cynthia, a physio, and Nan, one of the sisters, and we went on a blind date, the 3 of us with 3 guys, to the Wiper State Mill. No, the Wiper State Village Hall. They had a dance every Saturday night, and we went there, and the guy I went with, I haven't a clue what his name was, stood on my foot and really hurt it, so he wasn't very popular, and he'd had too much to drink. Anyway, this charming young man with a foreign accent asked me to dance, and it was Teo, and we danced a couple of dances, and then he said, do you ever go to the Ritz? And I said, not on my own. So he said, oh, how about coming with me on Saturday, next Saturday? So that's where we met and how we started going out. And when we were courting in those days, it was me sitting on the riverbank reading a book or writing letters or sitting in the car if it was raining while Teo did trout fishing, because he's mad on fishing. And Amelia's asked me, when did Grandad ask me to get to marry him? And I have no recollection of them ever asking me. I think we just decided to get married. Fishing. Teo worked at the Wiper State Mill workshop as a mechanic, and he wasn't a trained mechanic, but by the time he left they'd given him a grade A mechanics accreditation. But he was always, from the age of 5 or less, mad on fishing, and he saw this fishing business for sale in Raglan, and we went and looked at it over the deviation, which in those days wasn't even tar sealed and had a lot more bends in it than it does now, and decided to buy it. When the Germans invaded Holland, Teo was Well, in 1942, when he was 17, the Germans sent him to Germany as a foreign worker. And because it was a cheeky person and full of his own determination, he argued with them till they let him go to where his brother was. I'm not sure what the place was called. And they worked there in a factory, 12 hours on, 12 hours off. If there was bombing, they had to do the fire watching for the incendiary bombs. And then Jan and his cousin, I'm not sure what he was called, ran away, and Theo got a letter from them to say they'd made it back to Amsterdam. So he decided to run away, but he got caught, so instead of being comparatively free and living in a barracks, he was put in a slave labour camp with very little to eat and 20 of them to a cell, and being fed a lovely fish soup that was so salty, and then they weren't given any water to drink, and that sort of thing, and stealing food out of rubbish bins and things. So when towards the end of the war, he ended up in the famous camp Belsen, but there was a Dutchman there in charge of where Theo was, and Theo argued with him that he wasn't meant to be in there, and the guy let him go, so he only was in Belsen for 14 days. And after that, when the war finished, he managed to, only the soldier prisoners of war were allowed to go, the rest of them had to wait, but Theo wasn't waiting. So he went and he joined up with some French soldiers on their way back to Paris. And they took him on the train and they gave him a French name from one of their comrades who died, and they took him to Paris, and he had wonderful 2 weeks in Paris at the expense of the French government, and then he left there and went back to Amsterdam. And when he hadn't been back very long before he got called up into the Dutch army, because of course they didn't have an army after the war. And he was told, you'll only have to be in for 3 years and we won't send you to Indonesia. Well, he was in for longer than 3 years, and they sent him to Indonesia. In fact, he was in for 5 years. And he was in Indonesia when the Indonesians were fighting with the, not exactly fighting, but terrorism, like, only not as bad as now. But and Theo always blamed the British for giving the Indonesians the Japanese armory that was left behind. And there he could be demobbed back to Holland, or he could be demobbed to Australia or to New Zealand. So because his girlfriend had sent him a Dear John letter while he was in Indonesia, he chose to come to New Zealand. And he came in about 1950, and there were 5 or 6 plane loads of Dutchmen came from Indonesia to New Zealand at that time. He was told it was a subtropical country, and he only had his summer uniform. His luggage that was supposed to come with him got sent home to Holland, so he didn't even have his civvy stuff. And when he arrived here, they sent him to Roxburgh in March, when it was definitely not warm. And he, when they were building the hydro in Roxburgh, and when he got there, they were on strike. And he worked there for about 6 months, and then he said, I'm leaving. And they said, you can't. He said, yes, I can. I've paid my fare here. You can't keep me. So they couldn't keep him. And he worked for a while with an electrician on the Gore Hospital, and he worked for a coal merchant in Gore somewhere, and then he went deer stalking in Lake Haurako, and while he was there, his friend from Indonesia and his wife had gone to Rotorua, and they said, "Oh, come up here, it's good trout fishing." So he went up to Rotorua, and they used to catch trout with a worm, which was completely illegal. And they used to also, I think, fish in the Green Lake, which was tapu, and only the Maoris could fish there. But they didn't get caught, and he learned to do fly fishing. And then we got married, and we went to Raglan. Now, living in Raglan, it was very, very different place to where it is now. It was, really, really small town. Half-day closing on Wednesdays and late-night shopping on Saturdays. That was something I'd never experienced till I came to New Zealand, late-night shopping. And an area school, which was infants right up to school certificate. And I eventually made some friends. The elderly lady, I lived in a horrible house to begin with, and the lady that lived next door said, "You need some friends." So she invited the wife of one of the ones from the commercial bank, Anne, and she came and said, as people do, "Oh, you must come and see me sometime." So after a little while I rang her up and said, "Well, you've said come and see me, when shall I come?" And we've been friends ever since. So that was good. And it was hard living there. We had no hot water, not proper cooking, not a bathroom, outside toilet that when we got there didn't have the can for the night soil person to come and collect. And Robin was just little and he got croup, which was very difficult trying to keep a steamy atmosphere for him. And Teo used to go out fishing until he got the hang of it. Sometimes he went when the weather wasn't all that wonderful. And the Pop Gurnall, that we bought the fishing business from, went with him for the first 3 months, to teach him where because it was fishing for flounder in the harbour, not out over the sea. And he taught him the different sets and how to sling nets and where to sell his fish and everything. I had 3 sons, Robin, Gary and David, and Robin was 4 years and 3 months when David was born, and by the time David was 8, I was really tired of coffee mornings and talking about babies and cooking and things, which none of it was my cup of tea really. And Dr. Rose in the newspaper had said they needed more physios at the Waikato hospital, so I wrote in and asked to go there, and I was accepted. And fortunately in those days you didn't have to do a retraining, except I'd never ever used ultrasound, so I had to do an ultrasound course with a tutor. And in those days, physio in New Zealand, they did their training in Dunedin, and in the 3rd year they went out to different hospitals, and some came to Waikato, so we had a tutor. I learned an awful lot of physio because I had to supervise the students, so I had to learn very quickly. Well, my sons grew up and went to Raglan Area School, and all 3 of them were the Ducks in their last year at school. and then they had to go to Melville High School to finish to do their UE. And then they did train. All three of them chose engineering of some form or other, and did their training, and then they met some young ladies. I was very fortunate in my daughters-in-law. They were all really lovely people, so I was very pleased with that. And then I've got 11 grandchildren, 2 of them in Australia, and I've got, and the grandchildren are starting to get married and produce offspring. So I've got five great-grandchildren down in the Waikato and 2 here in Auckland. And they're all lovely. And just this past Christmas, I've been staying with Gary and Pam down in Tauranga, and got to know the 5 grandchildren down there a bit. So they don't look at me as with suspicion now when I say them. And I should mention that my eldest son, Robin, died in Australia 17 years ago, and it's his 2 children who are in Australia, Edward and Rose. And here in Auckland, I've got 6 grandchildren. Amelia, Joseph, and he's married to Lana and has 2 children, Scarlett and Sadie, and John, who's gallivanting overseas somewhere, is coming back soon. Tim, who's very elusive. You can never see him unless he really thinks he needs a can of V. And Luke, who is doing musical theatre training in Christchurch and who at the moment has pink hair. And Esther, who is gorgeous, lovely long legs, and she's a sports person who plays soccer in the winter and cricket in the summer, and other things besides. Work hard, do your best, be honest, stay off the grog and drugs, be kind to people and animals, and if you're in a relationship, never go to bed without making up an after an argument. Anything, I can't think of any more worldly wisdom. I certainly won't say any of them's 21st. Fletcher's only 6.
That you're unfaithful, but now there's nothing else.
Oh, I don't know. Trying not to be too argumentative. Trying not to think I know best. But long life, I don't know. I've been fortunate that my health's pretty good. It's deteriorating a bit now, but that's not surprising considering how old I am. I don't know. I've always done my best to get on with people. I'm not very good at I'm not very good at arguing. I very seldom win an argument, and I never won an argument with Teo. Perhaps that's how we lasted so long.